food in the month of Ramadan. New Muslims often complain. They come to the mosque and they eat their dates and they drink their water for iftar, and then they see all of the Muslims going off happily for family meals, leaving them alone. They don't have families for iftar. They don't have a supporting network. Let's look out for them this Ramadan and see if we can invite them to our homes. It's our obligation. Now, so many people, it's the religion of da'wah, the religion of tawheed, despite every obstacle that the shaitan and the ways of the world put in its way. What a glorious story. We need to be telling our children about the glorious story of those who have sacrificed everything in order to come to La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. How does it begin in this country? The glorious underestimated saga of the British Muslim community goes back at least as far as the year 1187. Sir Robert of St. Albans. We should know these people. They are our ancestors, our salaf, our heroes. In the time of the Crusades, a time when Islamophobia was universal, he goes on crusade. He joins the Knights Templars, the fiercest of all of the crusading orders, the monks who take a vow of celibacy and who always pray in their armor, fighting against the Saracens. He joins them. And by a series of extraordinary adventures by which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing his care even for these unlikely people, he ends up saying, La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. And Sir Robert becomes a great mujahid, fi sabilillah. He's a good soldier. He joins the army of Salah ad-Din Ayyubi. He commands one of the Muslim flanks at one of history's most critical battles, the Battle of Hittin, 1187, which is the battle that decides the fate of the Crusader invasion and ensures that Jerusalem is recaptured by its rightful custodians. Is there a more important battle than the Battle of Hittin? Won in many ways by Brother Robert. MashaAllah. After the battle, he's rewarded. He marries the niece of Salah ad-Din. We need to remember these people. They are our forefathers. What an extraordinary story. Our history is a history of heroes and martyrs. Thomas Keith. We should know these stories. From Edinburgh, a soldier converts to Islam in Egypt, swears his allegiance to the Khalifa in Istanbul, continues as a soldier, a good administrator, a pious Muslim, a mosque-going Muslim, and the Sultan makes him the wali, the governor of the city of Al-Madinah Al-Munawwara. Do we tell our children that a Scotsman was guided by the light of Islam to become the governor of the holy city? We should. These are extraordinary stories. We should know who they are. And it continues to the present. When we welcome these newcomers into Islam, we hear so many stories. Recently, we saw all of these documentaries about Alexander Litvinenko, the Russian. Another interesting story, a man of principle. He joins the KGB that then becomes the FSB, the post-communist equivalent of the Russian secret police. Does very well, but is a man of principle who cares about justice. And he sees things that are being done secretly that he cannot in good conscience live with. And he starts to talk. He's a secret agent, but he starts to talk. And he publishes books. He publishes a book in which he says, actually, the bombing of the apartment buildings in Moscow that the Russians blamed on the Muslim Chechens, it was an inside job. We did it. Man of courage. He has to leave his job, leave everything, endangering himself, becomes a refugee in England. One of the good things about this country is that when the system works, they can still help people like that. But then he's poisoned. You remember the story. In the year 2006, he gets ill, radiation poisoning, polonium-210, hugely expensive. They say it must have cost $5 million just for the small amount of radioactive material that was slipped in his tea. And he gets sicker and sicker. And the journalists are interested, and the politicians are anxious. But he says to his father, as he knows he's going to die, I've become Muslim. Politicians don't know what to do with this added complexity. The journalists certainly don't know how to report this strange thing. But he's a person of principle who cares. The day before he dies, he's in University College Hospital on Euston Road in intensive care, feeling really bad. He says, I want to talk to an imam. There's no Muslims around him, his family are perplexed, his handlers, it's all very strange, this religious thing. I want to talk to an imam. The imam comes, goes past the journalists, goes past the doctors, goes past the minders, the police, etc. He's allowed through. And next to this man who knows that he's passing through those final gates, he recites Surah Yasin and some du'as. And the next day, he dies. And there's nobody around him. This is the situation of many converts. When they die, there's nobody to help them. So he's buried in Highgate Cemetery, a non-Muslim cemetery. There's no Islamic anything on his tombstone. But we can go there. If we're in London, we can go to Highgate North Cemetery and recite a Fatiha. He's an honourable man. So many other stories that we hear here. And we need to be aware of the sacrifices that these people are making. One Muslim in Cambridge I used to know, from a very aristocratic family. He had houses in several countries, from a wealthy background. He used to come to Jummah with us. His family didn't like it. His wife didn't like it. This is not what these people who go riding with princesses are supposed to do. He dies unexpectedly. The family grab him. He has a church funeral. He's buried with his ancestors in the vault, and the Muslims don't go near. But still, we know he was our brother, a person of Islam. Another girl who is here, and think about these things in Ramadan, faithful Muslim, but her family, she's young, she lives at home, don't accept any of this. During Ramadan, she has to get up in the middle of the night secretly, without waking anybody, go to the kitchen and make her suhoor. For us, suhoor is a nice thing with family, but not for these people, these heroes who are sacrificing even family. فَلَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهُ مُحَمَّدٌ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ. A Hindu brother who has become Muslim. Very dangerous, Brahman, rich family. He can get away with the meals, the vegetarian and so forth, but they don't want to acknowledge his Islam. Who's he going to marry? It's another issue for our new brothers and sisters. Are we welcoming them into our homes and helping them to marry? Not always. He says he has to marry either a convert who's also a Brahman, who's also concealing her Islam, not so easy to find, or his family will be content with a really posh white girl who has lots of money and brings lots of status. They'll forgive him for that, and if she's a secret convert, he can do it. He can't marry anybody else. So we need to remember the huge sacrifices that these people have made since Sir Robert abandoned the Knights Templars and his family and everything. 2 weeks ago, a priest came to me. He says he wants to become Muslim, but he's going to lose his salary, he's going to lose his vicarage, he's going to lose his job, but he's still determined to do it. Just this morning, an Ethiopian guy emailed me saying he's just taken his shahada. It's happening. Despite the mess of the ummah, people still come to this simple and beautiful and healing and universal truth. La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. So we look to the seerah. And we find in the seerah it's quite unlike today. Today there's a few converts and a lot of born Muslims. Back then, there were very few born Muslims, maybe the children of the Sahaba, and everybody else was a convert. And their stories, subhanAllah, you can read the seerah just to learn from their amazing stories. Suhaib bin Sinan, al-Rumi, one of my favorites, Byzantine, Greek. Enslaved by the Greeks, escapes, goes to Mecca, which is outside the reach of the Byzantines. And he hears that there is this monotheist who is speaking out fearlessly against injustice. And remember, this is the time when the Muslims are praying secretly in the house of Al-Arqam ibn Abil Arqam, and they're being persecuted and killed, and families are separated, and some have gone to Ethiopia. At the most dangerous time, he says, I want this. So he goes to the house of Al-Arqam, and there is Ammar bin Yasir, one of the great Sahaba, who converts with him. And this, of course, turns his life upside down. He's become quite prosperous in Mecca, but now they won't let him leave. And when the hijrah happens, they guard his house. Quraysh will not allow him to join the Muslims. He has money, they don't want that money to go to the cause of the new believers in Yathrib. But he escapes. He says, I'm going to answer a call of nature. Under his clothes, he's concealed his bow and arrow. He's determined to get to Medina. Somehow, nowadays it's a high-speed train. Back then, a difficult, dangerous venture. Lions in the desert, predators, human and animal. He doesn't come back, and they start to look for him. And they find him in one of the hills outside Mecca with his bow and arrow. And he says, I'm going to pick you off one by one unless you let me go. They still come. And then he says, if I tell you where my wealth is hidden, will you let me go? Smiles on the face of Quraysh. And he's allowed to go, because that's what they care about. And he comes, after more adventures that I have time to tell, to the city of Medina, and he goes, of course, to the chosen one, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, who is the light of his heart. The Holy Prophet is so happy to see him. And he says, Rabihat tijaratuka ya Aba Yahya. Your business has just prospered, Abu Yahya. And it said that it was on this occasion that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the verse, وَمَنْ يَشْرِي نَفْسَهُ ابْتِغَاءَ مَرْضَاتِ اللَّهِ وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَشْرِي نَفْسَهُ ابْتِغَاءَ مَرْضَاتِ اللَّهِ, which is in Surah Al-Baqarah. Amongst those are some who pay for their own selves in order to please Allah. A great one. And he becomes elevated. We know that he recites and relates many hadiths. We know that when Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu is martyred in his mosque, who leads the prayers while they're choosing his successor? It's Suhaib. Not some big shot Arab from a major tribe, but the refugee, the asylum seeker, the new Muslim is in there. That's how the Sahaba were. They looked for the best. Salman al-Farisi, another